Imagine crossing a border you've crossed 100 times all your life, but this time something feels off. There are unfriendly stares, longer screening questions, and unnecessary searches. This is the story of Canadians on the U.S.-Canadian border. For over 200 years, this border was the gold standard. No visas, no tension, just open roads and friendly neighbors who trusted each other completely. But in 2025, the story has changed, and not for the better. Canadians are getting searched, detained, and even turned away. As a result, border crossings have decreased by 40%. The friendship between these two neighbors is quietly cracking. And for the first time in generations, Canadians are asking, are we still welcome? If you think this is just politics, wait until you see the shocking data. The signs are clear, and we'll discuss 7 of them in this video. Number 6 will throw you off balance because it's affecting Canadians who haven't even set foot at the border. Now, before we dive in, hit like and subscribe because every single information we are about to give affects 38 million Canadians, which might include you. Sign number 1 is impossible to ignore if you're a Canadian trying to enter the U.S. Number 1 sign is the increase in detention and screening. For the longest time, the 5,525-mile border between Canada and the U.S. was called the longest undefended border in the world. Canadians move freely into the U.S., whether for business, tourism, or education. However, in 2025, something unprecedented is happening. And we're not talking about minor inconveniences here. Recent reports show that Canadian travelers are experiencing increased detention times at U.S. borders. Dozens of innocent travelers are speaking up about being detained by the ICE for hours while trying to cross the border. But wait, it gets worse. Some cases even involve detention periods of not just hours, but more extended periods of multiple days or weeks. One Canadian actress was detained for 12 days in Florida, despite holding a valid visa. This reveals a sad reality. Whether you have the correct documents or not, you are not safe. What used to be a quick and seamless crossing at the border is now taking hours instead of minutes for many Canadian visitors. Ask any Canadian who has traveled recently, and they'll tell you these border detentions have caused considerable havoc. As a result, we see business travelers missing essential meetings because of extended border processes, families with children experiencing stress from long detention periods, and even older Canadian visitors having tension from extended questioning. All these negative experiences point to one thing: Canadians are no longer welcome in the U.S., but detention is just the beginning. Wait until you see the next sign, which encroaches on your privacy. Sign 2, increased privacy violations through thorough screening. Canadians visiting the U.S. used to be a walk in the park with no serious issues. However, as of fiscal year 2025, U.S. Customs and Border Protection now reports on border searches of electronic devices at ports of entry. What does this new development mean for Canadians? Here's what this means. Border searches are becoming increasingly frustrating. Canadian travelers report increased demands to unlock phones, laptops, and other electronic devices at the U.S. border. Now here's where it gets serious. These border searches violate a fundamental human right, the right to privacy. They check personal photos and videos, private messages, social media history, and even financial information. What's more, the officials conduct these searches without warrants. Failure to comply may result in delays or denial of entry. The authorities even go so far as to seize devices. Increasingly, Canadians are expressing frustration about the negative experiences they encounter at the border. Because of this, some individuals must wipe their devices before traveling to the U.S. or avoid carrying their work gadgets with sensitive information. If you're Canadian watching this, you've probably experienced this yourself. Consequently, Canadians are pulling back, and the numbers are making a statement. U.S.-bound tourism from Canada has dropped significantly. Bookings from Canadian airports to American destinations have declined by more than 20%. But that is not all. Airlines like WestJet and Air Canada are affected. These airlines have reportedly cut back or outright canceled routes that were once packed with travelers. You would be shocked at how many families are changing their vacation plans at the last minute, not because of the cost, but due to the anxiety of being detained or searched. When you're not wanted, you eventually stop trying. But detentions and unusual screenings are not the only signs keeping Canadians away. Our third sign makes it clearer. Sign 3, the 30-30 rule. Every year, nearly 1 million Canadian snowbirds escape the winter and head south to Florida, Arizona, and California. You could stay up to 6 months with no paperwork and no stress. However, something has changed in 2025, and we're referring to changes in policies. The U.S. now has a new policy that requires Canadians to register online with immigration authorities if they plan to stay longer than 30 days. This involves filling out an online application, submitting personal data, and, in many cases, scheduling an in-person verification. But why the sudden change in policies? The U.S. intends to track long-term visitors who overstay in their country, showing that the trust they once had has been replaced with suspicion. Sadly, Canadians are already feeling it. Although the application process for Canadian travelers is simple, ironically, that's where the problem lies. Many travelers, unaware of this policy change, are confused when they arrive at the border. The Canadian Snowbird Association insists that the rule doesn't apply to tourists, yet it's being used on them anyway, and the effect is real. Families who easily cross the border now face a system that monitors them instead of welcoming them. According to Statistics Canada, vehicle re-entries from the U.S. decreased by nearly 32% in March 2025 compared to the same month last year. Canadians are feeling uncomfortable with the harsh policies, and their discomfort is causing them to pull back significantly. If you're learning a lot from this video, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel because we're just getting started. With all this subtle hostility, it's no wonder that our next sign exists. You won't believe this is happening in 2025. Sign 4. Warning advisories from the Canadian government. For centuries, the Canadian government had absolutely no issues with its citizens traveling to the U.S. The ties between the two countries were strong, and their citizens enjoyed a warm relationship with each other. However, 2025 brought something shocking. Several European and Latin American countries, including Canada, have issued travel warnings against the U.S. Their warnings are based on the growing concerns over the mistreatment of Canadian citizens at the border. These advisories are not just random. The authorities have observed the growing animosity between the U.S. authorities and Canadian travelers. And it is not just other countries raising red flags. Even reputable educational organizations in Canada are speaking up. The Canadian Association of University Teachers, representing over 72,000 professors, researchers, and academic staff, issued a rare travel advisory against visiting the United States. The association specifically urged the faculty to reconsider travel if they are transgender, racialized, politically outspoken, or belong to any marginalized community. It also warns that Canadians may be detained, interrogated, or refused entry without justification, especially if they fall into one of those targeted groups. The hurt is real, and Canadians are responding. In response to this strong warning, universities across Canada have quietly updated their travel protocols. Conferences that once felt routine in places like Boston, Chicago, or New York are now being second-guessed or skipped entirely. Now, when the country's scholars start avoiding the border, what message does it convey? It's a clear sign that the rules are changing, and Canadians must reconsider whether traveling to the U.S. is worth the effort. Now, listen to the next sign, because this is important. This one affects you even if you're not traveling. It is no longer about travel, but about survival. Sign 6, economic discrimination through tariffs. Until now, Canadian investors have found pleasure and profit in doing business in the U.S. But in 2025, the U.S. introduced a significant policy change. They're not just searching Canadians anymore. They're actively hurting Canadian businesses. This one targets an entire economy. Let's break it down. In February 2025, President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, which includes steel and aluminum. Also, there have been threats of tariffs on Canadian automobile manufacturing. This tariff plan triggered an adverse reaction from the Canadian government. You know why? It is because their economic interests are being treated as adversarial rather than cooperative. But this discomfort is not just felt by the government. Even the investors and business people are reading the message. As a result, Canadian manufacturers are facing uncertainty about U.S. market access. They are redirecting their attention to other markets. When your closest neighbor and partner turns you into a target for their selfish economic measures, it goes a long way to show you where you stand in the relationship. Canadians now know where they stand in 2025. These economic impacts are severe, but our final sign shows damage that might be permanent. Sign 7, sovereignty challenges. For over 150 years, Canada has actively built its identity as distinct from that of the United States. However, in 2025, something profound is causing them to question that identity. The President of the U.S., Donald Trump, and his top advisors have repeatedly made annexationist and imperial threats against Canada with the endgame of turning the country into the 51st state. But that's not the worst of it. He even specifically told the country's departing Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, that he did not believe the border treaty between the two nations was valid. Can you imagine the implications of this statement? Whatever it is serious, and Canadians are not having it. Government officials have clapped back, repeatedly and publicly rejecting these suggestions, saying, Canada is not for sale and will never be the 51st state. The U.S. government's attack on Canadian sovereignty has led to growing skepticism about the U.S. intentions toward Canada. It is becoming clearer how the U.S. views Canada. Canadians now feel more of a subordinate than as an ally. This is not only offensive, but insulting to the identity Canada has tried so hard to build for over a century. Moreover, Canadians are upset. The situation is complex, but the reality is clear for even the blind to see. The relationship between the U.S. has been strained. There you have it. 7 glaring signs that Canadians are no longer welcome in the U.S. These signs paint a picture that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Now that you know them, here's what you can do about it. If you are a Canadian, you need to increase your preparation and caution when traveling to the U.S. because something more complex, cautious, and uncertain has replaced the easy, trusting relationship once existed between the U.S. and Canada. Examining all the evidence we've mentioned, it's difficult to argue that nothing has changed. This leads us to a bigger conversation. Are these changes a temporary disruption or a more permanent shift in one of the world's most important bilateral relationships? The answer will depend on the choices made by leaders and citizens in both countries in the months and years ahead. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe. One more thing, turn on your bell notifications so you don't miss a single video about traveling updates. Until we come your way again, stay informed.